Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest in a jam-packed schedule of POLITICO events. Welcome to Decarbonization of Heavy Transport and the Role of Hydrogen. This is clearly a very topical subject right now, given the level of ambition the EU has set for mitigating climate change in the years ahead. The big question now, of course, is how do we get there? So we'll start with some housekeeping points. Of course, we'd like to thank our partner, the CNH Industrial and Nikola European Joint Venture, for making this virtual event possible. Also, all of you watching externally, thank you for tuning in. You can, as ever, participate in POLITICO events by tweeting about it using the hashtag #DecarbonizeTransport, all one word. And of course, we use the Slido platform where you can engage in person, lodge your questions for us to ask to our speakers on stage. If you're following through Facebook or Twitter, just go to slido.com and use the hashtag again, #DecarbonizeTransport. If you're viewing through our platform on our website, it should come up on the screen there. So anyway, before we get going with a chat with Transport Commissioner Dina Vălean, let's have some opening words from Gerrit Marx, who's the President for Commercial and Specialty Vehicles at CHN Industrial, our partner for this event. Thank you, Gerrit. After you.
Thank you, Josh. And Commissioner Vălean, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, on and offline. I have the pleasure to introduce you to our way of thinking and our way how we are poised to change transportation and the transportation ecosystem. That's me. I'm the CEO of Iveco SPA in Italy and heading the Commercial and Specialty Vehicles division within CNH Industrial. Let me kick it off with a few facts, and this is the ambition we have as an industry. We need to reduce CO2 emissions by 2025 by 15%, but in light of a 30% target in 2030, we need to shoot much higher. And the recent announcements from the Commission and the future ambition, which we very much welcome, around tightening CO2 standards, the 30% you see here on the slide by 2030 can easily go to 50%, depending on where it lands. This means, just to give you some numbers, this will mean that about every second truck sold in 2030 has to be zero emission, has to be electric, battery electric for the shorter haul, for the lighter, heavy emissions, or hydrogen fuel cell for the longer, heavier emissions in our transport sector. This is a gigantic task when you think about today's registrations, where there's less than 0.1% of the newly registered trucks in Europe are zero-emission electric trucks. And as of today, there is not a single refueling station in Europe available that can refuel a heavy-duty truck at the pace and pressure it requires for a hydrogen powertrain. So that is clearly a starting point now, but we have to get there, and we have to bend the CO2 curve, not only in Europe, but around the world, where obviously CO2 emissions have kept rising, and we now need to, apply drastic actions in order to bend that CO2 curve and bring it back to levels so that Earth warming remains in the 2% corridor and doesn't get worse. So that is really the task that we have given ourselves. And we are very much focusing in our partnership with Nikola on the Arctics, on the heavy-duty long-haul trucks, where technology of this kind and this type of fuel really do have a payoff if the entire ecosystem of transport is connected, which means it starts from hydrogen production, refueling, distribution, all the way to truck production, servicing, all the way to the end of a capital service delivering a pay-per-use, pay-per-mile concept. That is going to be the future, and that's not the future that happens at the end of the decade. That is a future that has to happen soon if we want to see about 5 to 10% of electric heavy-duty trucks registered in 2025, according to the CO2 standards, and more than, here you can see 20%, but it's in fact will be 50% rather with the tightening ambitions which we have in Europe. It's a huge task, and it only comes with non-linear thinking and unconventional approaches, breaking down the silos between industries and creating a new ecosystem of transport. The way we think about it is We as Iveco, we have pioneered the LNG technology, liquefied natural gas. We are the ones who pioneered cryogenic tanks at minus 160 degrees centigrade, 8 to 10 bar pressure, in a trucking application to be applied in a safe way. And with increasing biomethane in this mix, it becomes more and more carbon neutral. And LNG technology today is the only readily available at-scale technology to power heavy-duty trucks as an alternative to diesel at minus 90% of NOx, 95% of particles, and when it comes from biosources, also in CO2. CH4, so methane today, is the source of hydrogen. It's the source of gray hydrogen, which is not the way of the future. The future clearly is the green hydrogen from renewable energies through electrolysis of water. This is where we have to go. But this is at the current state not available at scale, let alone at scale liquefied. So we need to start as an industry to put our metal on the road, to put the trucks on the road, to experience with it, because the fuel cell doesn't have a color code. The fuel cell doesn't care what color the hydrogen has, but it has to be on the road as soon as it gets, because we need to collect experience, we need to transform haulers, we need to transform fleets. And as we know from our LNG experience as the pioneers in this technology, it takes several years to transform a hauler from a few LNG trucks to 50 to 100 and more. So it doesn't happen overnight, it takes time. And that's why methane is also, from an infrastructure point of view, available across Europe. It will become available also then in liquefied form, as we can see it today. Around 300 fueling stations exist, and it is the bridge to what we call the green goal, which is clearly green hydrogen from renewable energy. But green energy, green hydrogen requires 10 times more energy than blue hydrogen. And as we need it fast, as I said in the beginning, we need it by 2025 at scale. Whatever can be green, I'm all up for it. I'm a big fan of green. But whatever can be green in the field, blue is okay. It will help us to experience the technology and step by step increase the green share. The start will not be perfect, but it has to be a start. And that needs to happen still in this decade and has to happen by 2025. We need to address greenhouse emissions comprehensively, all of them. And that is clearly an ambition that the European Commission has set out there, and we are fully behind it. Nicola and Iveco, we are fully behind this, and we want to set a new standard in terms of pace of transformation of the transport industry in the entire ecosystem. That is the key point. It's from the production of hydrogen all the way to the servicing of a truck. It's not just a truck. It's way more than this. It's an energy tech ambition that we have jointly with our partners. This is a very important project which is very close to my heart. It's the Scandi, Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor. It's one of the 9 transport green corridor projects that are being focused on. And it's very much a proving point that this can happen. If you look at this corridor, and there's about an average of 100,000 trucks traveling on this corridor from very north to very south. If we, by 2030, get 50% of these trucks electric, it will be just on this corridor 50,000 trucks. And in order to refuel them, it will require 200 to 250 refueling stations, which is absolutely doable. Again, we started with LNG 3 years ago. We have 300 LNG refueling stations today. And if we all act in concert and coordinated, we will get there just on this one corridor to electrify this amount of trucks and stop a lot of emissions going to the air. This was one of the ambitions which drove us to our partnership. We are proud to be the partner of Nikola Motor, and we are proud to bring these first battery electric trucks on the road to customers at the end of next year, in the 4th quarter of 2021. We are building right now these 5 first prototypes, which will be battery electric. We're going to take them for first turns already, or still this year, and then we're going to do a rapid validation cycle to be ready for these trucks to hit the road as battery electric end of 21, and then as fuel cell electric by end of 2023. we are here to drive this, and we have unconventional approaches, non-linear thinking, and certainly a certain level of aggression, but it won't go without it. With these ambitions that are set out there, it's not going to happen with conventional step-by-step thinking, one step after the other. It is a run, it is a sprint, and it will come with experiments, and it will come with new ways of thinking and a new generation. Thank you very much. This is a bit my introductory words for this day. Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you a good discussion and a good Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerrit, from CNH Industrial. That was a very useful introduction, especially early on in the presentation, outlined the scale of development that's needed in a very short period of time. I wonder, Commissioner Edina Valian, thanks for joining us. What's your vision to get to zero emissions transport by 2050? You're in the first days or first year or so of your mandate. What are you going to do in the rest of the mandate to get there?
The Green Deal is the blueprint for our political action. That's a fact. Now we have this new climate targets for 2030. Of course, we know from scientific data that transport would need to contribute with a 90% cut of emissions for a neutral emissions situation in 2050. So a lot to be done. But we are not starting from scratch or from zero, because we have in time developed robust legislation, standards, targets, CO2 performance standards. We have just to adapt and look in depth to this transformation. By the end of the year, I'm going to propose a strategy for the sustainable, smart, and resilient mobility. You'll see it before the end of the year, where I'm going to detail a vision on what is the direction where we should act exactly to see this moving as fast as possible. Of course, not to avoid a more precise answer, but I have to tell you that the whole transport sector has its own specificities depending on the modes, obviously, on what we have already per mode or not. Everyone will need to contribute to this transformation. And I think the measures and the tools we'll develop will be accordingly to the needs and possibilities and specificities of each sector. Is the road, rail, aviation, and maritime. And there are sectors in which we haven't done much yet, as it is the maritime. So we'll have to have a special focus on this one. Of course, for aviation, there are specific things to be considered in terms of the design of the aircraft, the possibilities of the industry, also for the road. But apart from looking at sectors as such, we'll have to have an integrated approach in terms of developing the intermodality, because we need, for example, to move as much as possible the freight from road to on train and on inland waterways, because these two are the most sustainable modes of transport. For this, of course, we have to develop all the digital solutions and smartening sectors in order to have state-of-the-art terminals, so on and so forth, that are available for tracking. So this is, because you asked me about our vision, we can look at each sector, but we have to look at them. And then the measures themselves are going to be a basket of measures, because unfortunately we do not have a silver bullet.
Sorry to interrupt, but you have been asked, you're in a very unique position, because you could please everybody right now if you were able to say to the green groups, also to the industry, to the OEMs, that you're going to expedite work on the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive. So that's a very real plan.
I was getting there, because as I said, there's a basket of measures, and a lot of emphasis we are going to put on the alternative fuels, and the alternative fuels infrastructure, because here we are a bit in a circle. Of course, we need vehicles for the recharging, refueling, but also the vehicles to be developed, they would need an infrastructure where to recharge or refuel, and keeping in mind the hydrogen in particular. But also we have to look at the efficiency of each mode, and this is again part of our vision on smartening all the transport modes. Now, if we talk about alternative fuels, again, in order to move fast, I would say that we need to be specific per mode, because there are things in our reach very quickly, and there are things in which we need to invest in the future in order to develop them. So it will take some time, I don't know, to deploy hydrogen for aviation. It will be there probably sometime, but not very soon. So we have to look at what it is on the market now. For road, it's a different situation. It was mentioned already that we already have important fleets with LNG and quite an infrastructure at LNG, which makes a difference for the emissions. That's true. But still, this must be seen as a transitional element, because in the future we have to look to zero and to zero emissions vehicles. And there comes the role of hydrogen, of course. You know, we have been acting, well, not myself directly, because my colleagues with industrial and climate policies, on this hydrogen strategy, then building up the Hydrogen Alliance. So I'm looking forward to see developments and how this potential actually becomes a reality. So this is, for electrical cars, there is also a difference we have to take into consideration, depending on the type of vehicle on the road, because it's one thing to think of personal cars, it's another thing to look at commercial vehicles, urban vehicles, public transportation, then heavy-duty vehicles, long haulers.
In your department, also other departments in the Commission that have been looking at this for a long time. But I just wonder on the substantial legislation, are you able to say that the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, a very real piece of legislation that will mandate the construction of recharging and refueling infrastructure needed for these vehicles to be rolled out quickly, will you work on that soon? When is it going to come?
At the beginning of next year, we are going to propose the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive. And I think it was already announced. Nowadays, I don't know what to start usually, because the whole subject is so large. And I thought it's already public knowledge that we committed to deploy 1 million recharging and refueling stations by 2025. And this is, of course, part of our work. And a part of the vision and the strategy, we are preparing ourselves to mirror this into our budget and in our financial arm, which is the Connecting Europe facility. We are working to present the working program for the next 3 years of this instrument, and you'll find there, I'm sure we'll have again opportunity to talk more in detail on what we are going to propose. So yes, I can reassure everyone that this is part of our work, the deployment of infrastructure for recharging and refueling.
Well, why has it taken so long, actually? Because there's a big debate over whether or not the new legislation that you propose will mandate binding targets for countries, or whether or not it will just have to be a voluntary scheme where countries can manage their own programs. Is part of the delay problems persuading member countries it should be binding to install new refueling or charging points?
This is too soon to discuss this. I'm not going to go there, because it's not presented yet, and of course we are analyzing the possibilities. What I would be interested in is to have them, so to find the best way to actually this become a reality. And as I said, I know where we want to get, and how it is best going there, we will see. But it is a signal we are giving, because through all our financial instruments, either through the multi-annual financial framework we are proposing, and the Recovery and Resilience Fund, Next Generation EU, we are adding or giving guidance in insisting that our flagships initiatives, which are being sustainable and digital, to be part of the projects which are going to be financed. And of course, I myself, I'm looking with my services into what is going to be proposed. We are planning to look into exactly the synergies and the realities and the national plans proposed, for example, for this resilience and recovery facility, to see exactly what movements we see in this respect there, in order to prioritize probably in the other financial instruments we will have at our disposal, the deployment of such infrastructure. So this is something we need to do. I intend to do it. How exactly is going to be binding or through what forms of... There are movements. If we are talking, for example, about the recharging stations, you can see in Europe there are countries in which just the market itself is deploying it. So you don't need, I don't need to put money from the budget or that country from the public budget for this, because already the market, the number of vehicles are requiring the infrastructure. The infrastructure is developing by itself by the market. Of course, there are others in which the uptake of electrical vehicles or I'm not talking about the other one because they do not actually exist, or they're too low. There, for example, of course, you need to have a bust and to insist and find the right incentive for the deployment of this.
I wonder, we have a question from Adrian actually that's come in on our Slido platform. Just looking at how you see the role of hydrogen and electrification together, which sectors do you think are going to be more prone to electrification and which to hydrogen? And do you see ultimately the battery craze at the moment, especially among many car makers, as being just a bridge to what will ultimately be a hydrogen future?
Let's see where future will take us. Our approach, of course, because there are some of these technologies not developed enough, our approach is to be, let's say, technological neutral. It doesn't matter how we get there. Our aim is to become neutral in terms of emissions and more sustainable economically. Why not? So let's see what the market is going to develop in time. With the electricity, of course, it's obvious zero emissions. It has a lot of advantages, but then if you look, as I do, to all the sectors we have in our economy and the debate on electrification in all the sectors, industry, whatever, buildings, everything, then you'll see the amount of electricity you need in terms of volumes. And then it's either you prioritize or you have to think that electricity has to be a clean one, or else we are talking what we are talking about. We don't want to move the emissions from the pipe tail to the production of the electricity or the batteries. So that's why I think there is room enough for everything. I took a point on the fact that also hydrogen, it has to be a green one, but also since we want to accelerate the deployment of these solutions and the cut of the emissions, we will have to look in the intermediate time also to lower them with maybe low emission solutions, not necessarily zero.
And just also to ask you about another pending policy question, the Eurovignette Directive revision, that would perhaps offer some incentives and stimulus in order to get clean vehicles such as hydrogen trucks on the road. Are you disappointed in the German presidency's failure to really make meaningful progress on that?
Well, I'm disappointed on the fact that the debate on the Eurovignette, it's not progressing for such a long time. When I took the office, and of course I had to look into what it is on the table and what we are working at, there were two things which I said, this makes so much sense and it has to be a priority to be pushed forward. Right now I manage just with one, with the Single European Sky, to revive the discussion about the efficiency of traffic management in Europe. But the second one was the Eurovignette, because it's absolutely needed accepted as a principle that all the externalities needs to be internalized, that beside of the user pay principle, we need to have the polluter pay principle included. I think it's fair, it's a good proposal, and I expect, I've been discussing with partners in the council, and I do expect at least a common approach by the end of the year, and I trust the German presidency that they will deliver.
Has Andreas Scheuer, the German transport minister, has he told you he can deliver this?
He wants to do that.
Okay.
That's what he told me.
So
he wants to do that. That's true. But he's not alone in this thing, because last time it was at the beginning of my mandate as commissioner. I started with a council meeting, and it was a discussion on the Eurovignette on the table, and there are so many countries having various ideas or reservation towards the issue. Now for the future, I think this is absolutely needed, and I really hope that at the beginning of next year we will see an important movement in Eurovignette. Of course, in the meantime, there are discussions about an ETS for road. Let's see if this is going to evolve or not, because then all these initiatives have to be fine-tuned among themselves to bring clarity and not overlapping in terms of asking people to pay several times for the same thing. But I prefer the Eurovignette.
And just also to get some clarity on another point that's related to this whole debate, the Commission has already said very controversially that it's going to reappraise CO2 standards for cars and vans next summer. Obviously, at the same time, the Commission has put into effect the same, or the first ever European standards for trucks for 2025 and 2030. Would you be in favour? Is the Commission thinking about reappraising the truck CO2 emission standards?
Well, as I said, we have several policy action available. If my colleagues in Klima, they want to push again on the standards, CO2 standards, that's a debate. That's one path. We'll have to look into it, what exactly they are aiming of proposing. But what my view as a transport commissioner is that we have to have coherence in between all these policies. So we have Eurovignette, we will have or not ETS for road, we'll have or not, again, the discussion on CO2 standards. All this needs not necessarily to overlap, so a bit of
it's not
synergy
a no.
there.
It's not a no on reappraisal. It's not a yes either, but it's not a no that you're looking at.
I don't want to make a news saying no. Let's see and debate on this.
All right, let's see. Just to batch together a few of the comments we have on Slido, there's a lot of questions about how you work to make sure that the energy going into hydrogen in the first place is green, that you go from grey hydrogen to green hydrogen. I wonder if you have any comments about that, the energy origin issue. Also then, looking at the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, the industry has, of course, called for binding standards. They've called for you to move very quickly on it, but they've also called for you to set standards for how refueling points, charging points should be calibrated in future so that everybody has a unified system across the EU. Can you also say in this legislation that you will include such provisions on standards, technical standards?
Well, I think having standards at European level is very important. So why starting with myriads of things which won't be on the same standard? I didn't pay much attention at this stage on what exactly technically is going to be in. So it's a discussion ongoing, but I will have a look at it. I never thought, because I was implying in my head that it has to be a particular standard. What was the hydrogen? I think I made already a point on the fact that, of course, the desire is for green hydrogen. By the other hand, we have to be realistic, and if we need to move fast, we have to use also the blue hydrogen in the meantime. That's my point.
So also just to pick up on the issues, the very newsy issues at the moment about the pandemic and what's happening around us, you obviously worked very, very hard in the early weeks of the crisis in the spring on making sure that freight networks were still functioning. And of course, there were days and weeks where there were very big delays on many border points. things aren't looking like they're going in the best direction at the moment. Should we have lockdowns again? Are you confident there are safeguards in place to keep trucks moving, whatever the cost, or are you worried you're going to have to do the same thing, calling ministers?
No, I don't worry in this respect. Of course, I worry for the pandemic and the situation and the impact it's going to have on travel and transportation, especially for the movement of people. But for goods, I'm less worried because I have witnessed firsthand how all member states found firsthand the benefit of cooperating. And it is a lot of praise on our proposal on green lanes. The green lanes are there to stay with or without the pandemic because it's proved very efficient for the transportation of goods across the borders and also for the safety of workers. So I think measures for the workers and for crossing borders are going to stay there no matter what, because they prove them to be very effective nevertheless. I have seen that the German presidency aims to present also a paper on things on preparedness. This is based on our guidance developed in time, and I think it's good to see what we can put in place to stay in order to avoid rash action in an eventual crisis. But I would say that the flow of goods and transportation, it worked well. We developed some very good instruments, and also something which proved very useful, it's the network of contact points in the member states. That's absolutely great because this already proves its efficiency for interacting, discussing and exchanging best practices nevertheless on the topic or not of the pandemic. So this, it's also very good. Then we developed all this application to monitor like GSA, the traffic in some points.
Satellite systems.
Yes, exactly. I want to keep this and find some budget to keep it in time because I think it can be used generally for the good flow of things with or without pandemics.
So that's the app-based system that allows satellite-based monitoring and observation of border points. It's very interesting. And so maybe just two final questions for you. When you look at the pandemic now, do you think that when we look back in 5 years' time, yeah, obviously this is a dreadful event, and trying to draw a positive side of it is quite strange, but the amount of interest in European investment that is maybe leveraged through the rescue fund, do you think this could be a catalyst point for the greening of infrastructure? Talking about obviously transport links here, hydrogen, electric charging points. Do you think you're going to get more money to spend as the EU on this now than you would have before the pandemic?
There is more money. There is more money if the Council will agree and will have these budgets in place. There's more money, but it's also the fact that my colleagues, they are looking also how to foster the private investment in this direction. And I know that most recently we had this debate about the capital markets, because a part of the public budgets, which can go until at some point, actually what we need is a private to support the private investment for this greening. And here is a challenge because we understand the fact that private investment in times of economic crisis, it's a question mark. But if something is put in there, it has to be for the future. And that's why I'm saluting initiatives. There are companies which are looking towards the future to exit this crisis in a better way, in a more sustainable way, because the direction, political direction in the continent, it's clear. And I think it's not only formulated as such by politicians, but it is asked by citizens and consumers when we see the behavior changes in consumers in many parts of Europe. And we have seen that now in pandemic. If we look at urban mobility, we have seen how people get very much excited in using more sustainable ways for mobility inside the cities. And I think also the cities and the region, the local administration are responding to these requests with new developments which are going to stay there. And new business models like mobility as a service, new ideas for urban mobility, these are going to be developed. And that's why this brings me back to one of your questions earlier. Let's see, because it might be that the market itself will react in a natural way. And innovation in new business models, it's always a strong point in Europe, so I expect that industry companies will adapt
And if
naturally.
we can if we can end on the point actually you started with, just about your sustainable mobility strategy, which is going to come out soon. And I guess this will be in a way a roadmap for what you intend to do over the next 3-4 years.
Exactly.
How many mentions of hydrogen are in there, and do we know a date of when it will come out?
A date when it will come out?
Is it ready to go now?
The strategy, or?
The strategy.
Yes, we have already consulted with the public and everything. We integrate it, we prepare it. It's ready to come out at the beginning of December.
Okay.
And I don't know how many mentions, but hydrogen is really an important part of the story, because there is a lot of hope that hydrogen can help us fulfill the need for sustainable alternative fuel for the future. And it's not only one mode, which would be road, but we are looking at hydrogen also for maritime. We are looking in the long future for aviation. Why not for train? So I would say there is a big case and a great opportunity for Europe to develop hydrogen.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us today, Commissioner Vălean. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully we get to speak to you again soon. Yeah, thanks. And so now we move on to a panel debate. With my colleague, hosted by my colleague Hannah Kokelara, who's a reporter at Politico working on freight and logistics. Hannah, do you want to take over? Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Kokelara. I report on logistics for Politico. And we've just had a wonderful introduction to our debate today with Commissioner Adina Vălean stating the Commission's hope for hydrogen to provide an answer to the EU's race to reach its climate targets. The transport sector has its work cut out for it, and as Adina Vălean already said, the modal shift takes a prominent role in the Brussels' hopes to green transport, but we also know that road transport is here to stay. You cannot shift everything off the roads. So that leaves an important task to be done for greening transport, for greening vehicles and fuels. So let me welcome to the stage my fellow panelists. I'm joined here today on the stage by Yorgos Chatzimarkakis, the Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe. Welcome.
Thank you.
And by Arthur Rungemetzer, the Director for Climate Strategy at the Commission's DG Climate Action. And then joining from a little bit further away are Mechthild Boersdorfer, the Director for Sustainability at the International Energy Agency, and Overit Trung, the Director for Green Mobility at ENGIE. Welcome. So I'd like to go back a little bit to what the Commissioner just said. She said in the climate strategy that we can expect early December, there will be a lot of focus on hydrogen, providing a lot of hope, she said. Now, she also said that we still have to see what the future will bring, and that is exactly what I intend to discuss with you for. What will the future bring, and what can hydrogen do in contribution? So let me launch into this with you, Arthur. The Commission recently launched a hydrogen strategy. Could you walk us through that a little bit and explain the role that hydrogen that transport plays in that strategy? Where does transport come in?
Yes, and I think I can start even a little earlier, because what we did is really looking at the long term. And I think from there we were saying Europe must be the first climate neutral continent by the year 2050. And then looking at that world in the year 2050, then we can see what the different energy carriers are going to contribute. And that is when you see the role hydrogen can play in many different sectors. And one of them is transport. And we know already today that there's some difficult areas in the transport area to be decarbonized. And I think Commissioner Vălean was mentioning them. And it's not only aviation and it's not only shipping, but it's also long-haul transport. And if you look around in terms of the concepts that are being tossed around in industry, of course, there's different technologies that are being tried. Some say, oh, let's go into the direction of more biofuels. Others say, let's go into the direction of hydrogen. And then a third group is saying, maybe we'll go into electrification. But the most important thing is for us to make sure that these technologies move forward. Because what we also know is that at the present point in time, they are extremely expensive. If they would not be that expensive, you would see them today already in the streets. So for us and for the public sector, the role is to make sure that we push this forward. And that is exactly what the hydrogen strategy does. And no matter where you use the hydrogen, first of all, you need to produce it. So there is a big focus on hydrogen production in Europe and making sure that, the big industrial installations that you need for that are going to be tested. So it means ramping up the size of electrolyzers, for instance, where there is research, demonstration money going into it. And I think we have the Innovation Fund at the present point in time. The call is open until end of October. And we assume that there will be quite a number of ideas on hydrogen coming forward in order to push the development and to make sure that we get as fast as possible into the economies of scale. The hydrogen strategy also very clearly says these are certain yardsticks into the future, what we need to build between now and the year 2030. And that all requires a huge effort. Then we also cannot just think of the production of hydrogen. We also need to look at who is going to use it. And as I said, there's many different applications where hydrogen will have a comparative advantage in the future. And transport, long-haul transport, could be one of those. But that requires that the companies are going to produce hydrogen trucks. So this is going to be a topic, for instance, in the European research program, that we can also support industry in the coming years to develop these technologies. And I'm quite pleased to see that some try to be the front runners and are really pushing ahead. And we want to be partners in that. If there is assistance required, if there is support required, we are open to this in the coming years to really make sure that we move forward and we become the leaders in that type of technology in Europe. And I think there's very good examples, and I'm sure Joril, you will tell us more about that, what you have in the kitty together with industry for the coming years. And I think that is where we can partner up.
So not just the production of hydrogen, but also making sure that it will be used and will be put to use in different industries. That is an interesting question, and I would like to flip that around and ask over it. Is there a use for hydrogen in transport? If the hydrogen is readily available, then the question can be asked, what role does it play in transport? And before I give you the words, I would like to mention for our audience watching online that we're still very keen for them to participate. They can tweet using the hashtag decarbonize transport. And they could also ask us questions using Slido, that is either on our webpage where it's embedded or going to Slido where they can ask those questions. Over to you, Overith.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm really pleased to share our experience on hydrogen, but also the other alternative fuels. As an energy player in Europe, we have been providing clean fuels to our customers for more than 2 decades so far. And so the experience that we have is that we cover both electricity, biogas, and hydrogen. And per se, the way we see the market evolving is that electricity is clearly becoming a viable solution. So it's very fine for the use for short distances as cars in the urban environments. It's going to the utility van, it's going to the commercial space. And at the other end of the spectrum, we see that today our customers, the transport companies, use biogas and also both in compressed natural gas form, but also in liquefied natural gas form to provide long-haul transport for the transport of the goods locally, but also across Europe. And in between, we have this segment like for the buses, where there is a bit of electricity, gas and biogas are still the favored option, and hydrogen is also taking its place. Today, we cover this full range, and we see that we start to have many demands for hydrogen. Some of our customers that are the end customers, so the ones that orders services from the transport companies, they are thinking forward. They know that at some point of time, if they want to implement and respect their commitments in being carbon neutral, they will have to act on their logistics. And they are coming to us and their transport companies to understand at which time horizon hydrogen will be an option for them, how they could switch, and especially for the ones that are many different factories across Europe and that have many shipping lanes, how they can make sure that they can lower at the maximum the carbon footprint of the shipping of the goods across Europe. So we really think that hydrogen has a role to play. We are all here to work together to make sure that it can happen sooner than later. And it was mentioned earlier, we have long lead times within the industry. Technology needs to be made available. It needs to be industrialized, and to come to the market, it needs to be adopted by the users. So it takes long lead time. Hydrogen will come. We need to make it happen at scale. And for the moment, we need to combine electric and biogas to make sure that we can transition smoothly to hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Overith. Mechtelt, I wanted to ask you, the IEA recently put out a study about hydrogen. How do you see the development of hydrogen evolving in the future, and how do we use hydrogen to evolve towards zero emissions?
So thank you very much, and also inviting us. I'm connected from Paris and looking forward to come back for conferences in Brussels in person. I think that's a bit more lively sometimes. Anyhow, the IEA did a major hydrogen study, and we spoke when we did it, and it's a global study, about a momentum for hydrogen. I heard the commissioner saying there's hope for hydrogen. I think we go a little bit further because we see hydrogen as a carrier. It's not one technology, it's a carrier which has many applications. So we have been looking at hydrogen in the different regions, Europe, Japan, US, other parts of the world. And we have been looking on the production side and on the user side. And if we look at the net zero world, which we are aiming at globally, we certainly need to increase hydrogen. And we see that hydrogen demand in a net zero world would be 7 times higher at least. So hydrogen demand would come from all sectors, but we see hydrogen demand growth mainly coming from the transport sector. There are also other sectors like industrial applications, power, others, but we see the demand globally coming from transport, either directly for hydrogen or for hydrogen-derived fuels, which can be ammonia or synthetic fuels. One other point here is, as also was said, for the time being, hydrogen is basically produced by fossil fuels. So it emits more than 900 million tons of CO2 every year, which means this is equivalent for CO2 emissions from UK and Indonesia combined, just to highlight where we are right now. If we speak about cleaning the hydrogen, there are different ways. There's certainly the one when we combine hydrogen with carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and usage. Some call that blue hydrogen. Or we can, what is the future, invest much more in green hydrogen with electrolyzers. But if we want to have also then to scale up the clean hydrogen, the renewable hydrogen from electrolyzer, here we also see that it's, as it was also mentioned by the first speaker, it's a huge task. It's absolutely a huge task. If we speak about heavy duty transport, most trucks are now diesel based. There is hardly any electric trucks or hydrogen based trucks or others. Trains and other means of transport, it's still relatively low. So we think that there is a need to scale up hydrogen. That can be done in order to increase the green hydrogen, certainly by scaling up electrolyzers. And I think the moment now with the recovery packages from the EU, for example, but many other governments, combining, putting hydrogen and clean energy transitions at the heart of the recovery plan is one way. And I think, as I said, the EU is certainly a very good example here that hydrogen is part of that. And if governments and the EU put that, we can gain. Renewables are becoming cheaper. 80% of electricity for electrolytic hydrogen production costs are from electricity, so that would directly benefit from cheaper renewables. And also we can see that CCS, CCU infrastructure, at least in some parts of the world, in Europe still very, very little, can also help. So I think we can see a future for clean hydrogen. We need to speed it up, and there are different ways to speed that up, and I will just come to that because they are mentioned in our hydrogen report, and we reviewed these recommendations in light of the COVID situation we are now living worldwide, globally. And I think there are means to scale it up in different areas, for example, in industrial ports. We already indicated that, and there's one key example in Europe, which is the port of Rotterdam. There are others where we can combine industry, energy-intensive industry, refineries and others, and produce hydrogen. And that would be job-intensive, which is also something we are looking at, but it was also greener. And we see then also in many others, I will not go to everything, certainly expand hydrogen in transport in different ways, in high mileage cars, trucks and buses for carrying passengers and goods. So there is a good momentum for hydrogen, also in the difficult situation we are right now, and also for transport and the heavy duty transport sector, which we are focusing on today. Thank you.
So I hear we have momentum, but also a momentous task, a huge task in front of us. So I want to ask Jorgo, where do we start? Because we've frequently heard concern that we're in a chicken and egg situation, in a vicious circle, if you will, where there's no vehicles and then no infrastructure and therefore no incentive to buy vehicles. How do we break out of this vicious circle? What do we do to reach the next step?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and thanks for having this event here. When I listen to Mechthild, I wish she would be back in Brussels because we need that spirit. So we are waiting here for you. Indeed, the hydrogen strategy, and Arto was alluding to it, could be the starting point of overcoming the chicken and egg problem. Because that's what we have. I mean, we have the situation, the country I know best is Germany, where we have 100 hydrogen fueling stations, but only 500 cars, passenger cars. So that's a mismatch. We have the infrastructure, we don't have the cars. That is why it's so important to have listened here to OEMs. We have listened to Gerrit Marx, who is building the cars, the vehicles. That's what we need now. Now, the hydrogen strategy of the European Commission foresees 1 million ton of renewably produced hydrogen already in 2024. That's quite remarkable because the Commission binds themselves within the mandate, within this mandate. So Adina Valian sitting here has put pressure on herself and of course on us to implement this. 10 million tons in 2030. So from 1 to 10 million tons. Now, the low-hanging fruit is industry. We have already today big demand of hydrogen. Mechthild mentioned it in the chemical industry, petrochemical, steel. That's low-hanging fruit. So we will find customers for this. However, as you mentioned, Mechthild, the growth that can be expected from hydrogen technologies, it's much stronger in the transport part. And that is why we need to be very concrete. We have a plan. The hydrogen strategy foresees one concrete tool to implement the strategy. It's called the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. At this alliance, there's one round table. There are 6 round tables for each part of the value chain. One round table is regarding mobility. And we have a very concrete plan. Gerrit already alluded to some elements of this plan. Basically, it's achieving with one corridor, 10T corridor, half of the demand of what ATUR wants to have. In 2030, you want to have 20% of zero-emission trucks. That's reality. And if we implement this strategy or this plan, 10% could be done already on this 10T corridor. Why this corridor? We have with Iveco and with Volvo Daimler 3 OEMs that are working, so to say, on this corridor. It's Sweden, a Swedish partner, a German partner, an Italian partner. It's exactly that corridor. We would like to see basically in 10 years, so until 2030, 40,000 trucks to be built and to run on this corridor with 218 fueling stations. Different technologies. You have alluded to the different liquid and gaseous technologies. And that would be already an abatement of 4.6 megatons of CO2. Very concrete. And that's exactly 10% of what ATUR wants, or of what the Commission wants. And we will sit down now at this Hydrogen Alliance, at this round table. The job is until the end of the year to present a project pipeline. And one of the project pipelines will be exactly that. And I'm very happy. I can tell you it's not so easy to kickstart this, because we are talking about a systemic change. So it's disruptive. It's systemic change. It's from going from horse to locomotive. And this needs a lot of concentration, a lot of action, collaborative action, a lot of money. Adina just said there is money. We now need to bring the money to the right projects. And we need people who are committed. And I will finish with that. It's very hard to find people in the industry who have this commitment. Gerrit is one of them. So we have some of them. Gerrit is one of them. You need people who believe in that. And I think the example of Iveco being a quite normal diesel engine producer, getting then to a very, very good CNG, LNG producer of cars, and now using this technology as a bridge to go to zero emission, this is exactly what we need. And I have to say, if the hydrogen strategy is about one thing, it's about global championship. It's about a European leadership on a global scale, on a global level. As far as I can see, both Volvo Daimler and Iveco will produce the stacks, so the fuel cells in Germany, especially in Baden-Württemberg. And that shows already that we are creating hubs for global competitiveness. And this is what we need to do, and this is where we are going to thrive with this hydrogen strategy that in the end will create hydrogen as a commodity. It will be a new commodity. We are talking about clean hydrogen. And I hope that the price of every ton of hydrogen will be built, will be made in Europe and denominated in euro and not in renminbi or not in dollar. Thank you.
So European leadership there.
Absolutely. And we have some global players here, like Iveco, like also, I mean, I can mention Volvo Daimler, who are going for that global leadership. We have it also in other parts of transport, Alstom. Huh? We have it also in train, Alstom, Siemens. So it exists, and we need to discover this. And I'm absolutely happy that the Commission has put it very high on the agenda, because it allows us Europeans to regain global leadership in parts where we have lost it.
Now that has got to go along with legislation, and I would like to go back to what Commissioner Vălean already discussed with my colleague Josh before. We are expecting the reform of the Alternative Infrastructure Directive, and we've heard plenty of calls to make these rules more stringent, to make targets mandatory, to perhaps even make the directive a regulation. I would like to ask your perspective over it. Where does this come in?
I would say what have been said, we need in fact to be fully at scale, and the question of the costs of hydrogen is very key. So meaning that by the end of the day, I would say the customers, if he wants to adopt these new solutions, he has to be affordable for him, because by the end of the day, it's a matter of cost competitiveness in terms of the service that he provides. So it means that we need, I would say, to be at scale, because by having enough volumes, we are able to lower the cost of the technology, both to produce the energy, but also to dispense it, and also for the vehicles to be able to be adopted and used by the customers. So from our experience, we have seen it in terms of the development of biogas and liquefied natural gas networks across Europe. The way it worked was that we benefited, I would say, from a strong collaboration both between the public sector and the private sector to make sure that the projects are taken and that they become viable. How it can help? I would say it's a triangle. You need to have the customers of the transport companies that commit, I would say, to give some visibility to the transport companies to be able to switch and to invest in new vehicles. We will need the OEM to provide the technology. And we will need also an energy supplier in the system, in fact, who commits to set up the fueling infrastructure and to make it available. In France, we are, I would say, dispensing today more than 1 terawatt of gas for mobility, and it's increasing year on year. If you look, I would say, at the trucks that runs on biogas on a day-to-day basis to ship in the goods to the inner city, you see that there is an increasing number of it. And it worked because there was, for each of the projects, enough support, both to the users, both to the transport companies, but also to the fueling infrastructure, and also the support that was necessary for the technology and R&D. And just to give you an example, next to Paris, we opened a fueling stations. We worked it through, I would say, a Connecting Europe Facility Fund 3 years ago. And we found the support of the European Union, and we found the support also of some of our partners that are in the room today in terms of the trucks made available. I would say it would not have been possible to set up this particular fueling station, which is quite next to an area where I would say 50% of the food and beverage in France transit. It's a strong node, a strong location, which is along a TEN-T corridors, and it shows that by putting, I would say, all the different stakeholders together, providing the right incentive, setting up the right policies, it works. And I strongly believe that if we amplify it, if we put it at scale for hydrogen, it will also work sooner than later.
So what would be the right policies? Would you agree that the future alternative fuels directive or infrastructure directive or regulation, who knows, that would have to leave more of an impact, have mandatory targets? Would it have to be a regulation?
I think that when we look at the first directive regarding the alternative fuel infrastructures, it helped a lot, I would say, to have each of the countries building roadmaps. Now we need to have the roadmaps that are converging. It helps to mobilize all the different stakeholders, but also all the available funds to invest in the infrastructure. So the figure was mentioned, we have more or less 300 fueling stations on LNG today across Europe. I think that it took only 3 to 4 years to have this full network, and it's working today because we have many operators coming to us today asking for the use of LNG and for the use of natural gas. I do believe that in the next versions, we will have the targets to be set to be reasonably ambitious, to have the funds and also to have the right partnerships across Europe to sponsor all the different projects. One was mentioned today that goes from the north to the south. I think we also need to be along the other corridors that goes from west to east and from northeast to southwest. We need to be all along these main corridors, because by doing this, we are having, I would say, a bubble effect. It means that from these very key locations that will serve many different type of customers for mobility, but with hydrogen, we have this chance to serve also different customers. We'll be able to expand the network from these primary corridors to the secondary corridors. I strongly believe that it will be working because it has worked in the past with all the other alternative fuels. It has fostered the adoption, and today the question is how fast we can accelerate on this, how efficient we can be in the collaboration, and what are the funds that we want to mobilize, and having all the different parties aligning the interest into this.
Right, thank you. I would like to put the same question to Arthur, actually. We already asked the same question to the Commissioner. We know that this is a work in progress, but what can we expect from AFID revision?
I think the AFID revision needs to take into account that Europe wants to become climate neutral by 2050, and that Europe wants to move to minus 55% in the year 2030. And that, of course, is a completely different story compared to the targets that we had adopted in the past. It means that the rollout of alternative fuels infrastructure will have to go faster. And I think the legislation will have to be more effective in doing that in the coming years. And I think the good thing here is that this can go hand in hand also with the European funds that are going to be deployed in the coming years. And it's not only the ones that are related to the recovery, because there, if you have seen the Next Generation EU, this is one of the lighthouse projects, and Commissioner Vălean was talking about that within the next 5 years we want to have 1 million more fueling points for alternative fuels. But that is only the beginning. We have to go further than that, and also member states will have to take their responsibilities here and to make sure that this is going to happen. But that is not the only piece of legislation that has to change. Because as was made clear, we are talking about an entire value chain that goes from production, that goes to the vehicles, and that goes to what types of services are going to be provided where. And one thing that was already mentioned before is the vehicle standards we are having. And it's true, for heavy-duty trucks, we have adopted them for the first time a few years ago. But what Parliament and Council have also said is that we must come back to it in the year 2022 on the basis of the first experiences and on the basis of the rapid technological development we are seeing at the present point in time. And not only because we have changed the targets. And there's also some some vehicles that we have not been regulating yet. We have focused on the heavy-duty trucks, but still the ones that work on the short range, so all the delivery vehicles in the cities, in the regions, are not yet regulated. We haven't regulated coaches and buses. We haven't regulated trailers. So these are things that can also help to clean up the automotive sector, the truck sector, quicker than what we had imagined a few years ago.
So you say potentially revisiting those standards along with other legislation to move quicker towards the targets that the EU has set for itself. Now, the road transport industry has been calling for a rethink of those standards in the sense that they would like to focus on well-to-wheel emissions rather than just tailpipe emissions alone. I would like to ask, well, not just your perspective, but let's start with you. What do you think about that call?
You see, for us, it is already an obligation that we look into this. Because when we had the last round of discussions with Council and Parliament, that is something that was put into the legislation, saying when you do a review, you must look at well-to-wheel. And that is what we are going to do in the coming months for cars and vans. And we will do it in a serious manner. And I think what is interesting is there's many proposals coming also from industry looking at is this something that you can make work, yes or no? Because I think one thing that is important is that we need to avoid, for instance, double counting. Kind of we can't account the same emission reductions in the fuel sector where we set targets on fuels and then we take the same reductions and take them for the automotive sector. In that way, we are never going to get to minus 55%. So these are some of the intricacies that we will have to look at in the coming months. But I'm sure we will have a very good exchange on that with industry on this.
So time will tell. I would like to ask the same question.
Well, I would like also make one remark on the AFIT. The AFIT so far was not obligatory for hydrogen fueling stations. So that would be one important element to have an obligation for member states also to concentrate on hydrogen. Also, we need to think then on the price tag. I stick to my example, the example of the Scandi corridor. These 220 refueling stations, which is overseeable. It's not that many. It's 1 billion euro. It's 1 billion euro. So it is okay. It's in the limits. But we need to understand obligation plus the funding and financing mechanism that needs to come with it. Because some of the member states, AFIT, if you talk about Poland, Czech Republic, so far, they have not an elaborated hydrogen strategy, but they are working on it. And this AFIT would then make that possible, what was mentioned before, not only one corridor, but all the corridors could then be in the focus. Now, when it comes to well-to-wheel and when it comes to tailpipe, I think we should not become too complicated, and we should be transparent and try to avoid double counting and double standards. We discovered that there's another mechanism that is much more important. That's the carbon content. Carbon content as the new currency. Of course, we can see that in hydrogen. In hydrogen, we talked about the different forms of hydrogen. In the end, clean hydrogen has to have a cap of carbon content, and this is very, very important. So we could do the same. I know that Arthur is extremely actively involved into the ETS Innovation Fund and into heavy industry, into energy-rich industry like steel. There we have the same issue. I mean, if Gerrit is going to build his trucks with steel that is produced without CO2 emission, it's much more expensive normally. But it shouldn't be much more expensive because the carbon content should set the price. So you see, it's not just well-to-wheel, it's also what kind of steel do you use. So in the end, we need one standard that is used in all these applications, and there we have to discuss to make it easy for everybody to understand. On top, of course, we are Europe. We might go faster than other geographies. We need a carbon border adjustment mechanism. If we do that, we need to talk about it. I know there's also ETS. I know there's also something that is in parallel to that. but we should make it too complicated. We should learn from the shortcomings also from ETS, and we should envisage the carbon content as the new currency principle as something that would help us to have one line everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Mechthild the same question. Yeah, over to you, Mechthild.
So thank you very much. I just want to, because obviously Europe is leading in many sense, certainly with the European Green Deal, with a minus 55 emission reduction target, and also in a lot of space when it comes to hydrogen. But it's not the only one. I mean, Europe is certainly leading when it comes to research and development, and there are certainly leading companies. But we are working also a lot with Japan. There's Toyota, Mitsubishi. There are also some progress in the US when it comes to fuel cells, or China when it comes to some applications. So what I want to say, that it's good that Europe is leading and putting a lot of effort, but I think international, because the challenge is so big, and the economies of scale is the only way of getting the cost down, certainly for clean hydrogen. I think a cooperation broader than only Europe, with other partners across the world, there are international fora and so on, is another step which I think everyone could learn from each other. So I wanted to start with this. Otherwise, I think the other challenge is obviously that we need much more innovation and research and development. I think the first speaker mentioned that it's a game changer if we want to become and decarbonize the transport sector in particular, and all the different parts of the transport sector. I mean, it might be easier and there might be different solutions if we speak about two-wheelers, personal cars, or coming to commercial vehicles like Arthur mentioned. There's also companies like Amazon and others, DHL, who are investing in electric or hydrogen cars. And then it comes to heavy trucks and others. So I think we have to look, net zero means we have to look at always. And for all those, I agree that for example, infrastructure is very important, this chicken and egg problem which was mentioned, but also the scaling up and innovation to be much faster and deploy it at a stage which should go beyond Europe and have including global partnerships.
Thank you very much. I would like to switch quickly to questions that we've received over Slido. We've received a question: how can we encourage the transport sector to decarbonize in a sector so competitive in price if trucks and green hydrogen are so expensive? Arthur, would you be able to answer?
I think that is one of the key questions, because that is the right question. If you look at the prices at the present point in time, hydrogen is quite expensive compared to the fuels that are there. And of course, the trucks are much more expensive. So the first thing that needs to happen is demonstration at large scale. And that will have to involve funding from the public side, because otherwise it's not going to be done by the private sector. I think that is very clear. And therefore, the initiatives in the context of our research programs, on our innovation programs, in terms of our 10T programs, the 10E programs, to make sure that we support the rollout of the infrastructure in the early stages. I think that's absolutely essential. The other thing that we can do then later on, when we see that this is going to move into the market, and we still know that the carbon price alone is not going to push it into the market, we can of course set standards and mandates. And that's what we do, for instance, with the truck standards. That's what we do with the car standards. But that is also what we do with the fuel standards. Commissioner Valian was talking about aviation, for instance, where alternative fuels, sustainable alternative fuels play a role. Jorgo was mentioning ammonia that might be important for shipping. All of that is also linked to hydrogen. So there is opportunities here then also via standards to help to make sure that these new technologies move into the market. And then comes the time when they will be fully competitive. And then I think the carbon price will be sufficient to keep on moving and pushing the technology forward. But what we are talking about is a decade and more in terms of developing this in order to get there to a competitive market.
If I understand you correctly, we'll need some cash the first couple of years to get started and then see where the carbon price brings us afterwards. What would you say to that, Jorgo? Do you agree?
I fully agree. I said already carbon content should be priced, and then you see that the prices change. We believe that with the schemes that we are setting up now, especially for green hydrogen, renewably produced hydrogen stemming from solar, there will be a parity already in 8 to 9 years in some instances, especially Spain, Morocco, Northern Africa are destinations where you can produce very cheaply electricity, hence hydrogen. And I think it's exactly what you say. You need, this systemic change needs money. You need to put money in, not only CapEx. I think this is a big misunderstanding that we always have here in Brussels, that the CapEx costs are the main thing. No, it's much more than that. It's also the OpEx costs. And I think as much as I was fighting now last 4 years for hydrogen, I will now start to fight for new state aid rules. We need to overthink that if you go for Green Deal and for systemic change, you cannot do it with the state aid rules that we have so far. We need to allow in certain circumstances 100% funding. Arthur does not like this, and he does well because he has to protect taxpayers' money, so I appreciate very much that you are fighting for that principle. However, we have also to see which are the principles that we want to go for. Coming back to concrete action and to how this would look like in our concrete example, that would mean in our concrete example that we would start with 4,000 trucks until 24. I'm looking to the OEMs, so the OEMs are 4,000 trucks. That's a lot in 4 years, 4,000. But that's exactly the starting point of this truck number that I mentioned and that also Gerrit mentioned, if we want to be successful with this 10%, so half of the target that you want to have. And we want to be concrete. 4,000 trucks, it's doable, but it needs concrete action immediately and now. In terms of fueling station, it's only 108. Price tag, 330 million. So it's doable. It's something which is doable and which can be done step by step.
Thank you very much. I'll go to another question that we got. Let me first go to Arthur actually for a reaction to that. Are the EU state aid rules, do they risk hampering investment in hydrogen?
I think that this is something where we already have said and committed ourselves that we need to look at them. And we want to do that also during the course of next year in order to make sure that they are also modernized in order to take into account how big the step change is that we need to make. And I think the challenge is much bigger. It's not these tiny little steps that we have been working on over the last 30 years, and our emissions have gone by 25% over those 30 years. What we want to do now is to do another big step forward, a 30% change within 10 years. That is kind of a leap forward that we want to make, and that is going to continue in the 2 decades thereafter. And that means there will have to be more support allowed, and we will have to look very closely at these state aid rules and what to do. And one of the issues that was mentioned here is the issue of OPEX. And I think what we have done already on our side in terms of the Innovation Fund, we have learned from the history, and we have said it's not only CAPEX we are financing, but it's also the operational expenditure for a certain period of time. So that is already coming into the game when it comes to spending EU budget. And I think we will continue that also with the next generation of the Horizon Europe programs.
So change to come.
Soon.
Soon. I have another question here. Somebody asked how, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank for a second here, how hydrogen corridors square with the ongoing revision of the 10E regulation. I wanted to ask you this question, Mechthild.
It's about 10E regulation that I think you should ask more Arthur, because I'm not an expert on 10E or 10T right now.
Right. Well, they were asking, can blending hydrogen into natural gas really be considered green? I should have added that. That is your
Okay.
turf. How do we move? Oh, there it is on the screen for everyone to see. Can it be considered green? Do we use it to move towards what we would call green hydrogen?
I think we in the IEA, when we did our major report on hydrogen and continued to work and even more focused on the comparing not only cost and scenarios, but also looking at the different regulatory frameworks, we tried to avoid this color code. I mean, we need to decarbonize, we need to move from hydrogen, which is produced right now basically by fossil fuel, to cleaner hydrogen, that's for sure. But in the meantime, I think for a net zero world and the ambitions we have, not only in Europe, but globally, we probably need different forms. And that can be hydrogen, which is with CCS, at least for now, and at least for now it's still slightly cheaper than the green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, renewables-based hydrogen, is still quite expensive. So I think we should be open. And the advantage, if you come to the question, I think the good point for Europe in particular, there's an excellent networks of gas pipelines, natural gas pipelines, and that can be used also for hydrogen. So that is an advantage when we come to the deployment. I'm not sure about the 10T regulation, but this blending is obviously a positive means and as part of the network which exists in Europe, and the gas network is well developed. I think that is a plus for the further development of hydrogen.
Thank you. Yeah, I would have to remark that it was a 10E regulation being referenced. I wanted to ask over the same question, actually, what role do transitional fuels have, and how do we square focusing on these transitional fuels to cut emissions now, but also not lose ambition for longer-term projects like, the hope for hydrogen?
Well, thank you for this question, because I think we mainly focus on how to scale up hydrogen and make it a reality in a near-term horizon. First, the way we see it at ENGIE is that all the work that has been done today along the 10T corridors and also the AFIT laid the ground in terms of the networks for the usage of hydrogen. Why? Because for us, as an energy supplier, we see hydrogen as a gas, as long as we can see biogas as a gas for our customers today. And today, our customers which are using biogas for transporting goods, whether for short-range mission, for long haul, they are willing to transition to hydrogen. So coming back to all the questions that we discussed just before, I would say the clear locations where we build the stations today will be able, with the same customer that are the transport companies, will be able, in fact, to convert the locations towards hydrogen once hydrogen become affordable. So I would say that with all the different technologies that we have in hand today, we should continue and pursue our works with the available technologies as the costs that are decreasing, just to prepare for the switch to hydrogen. We talked about financing this scale-up. I think that clearly there will be a need to have a strong partnership between the private and the public sector to be able to roll out the infrastructure, but we should not forget also the transport companies to make it affordable for them to get the new vehicles. And for this, I will say, all the support that we have been seeing for projects like one that we are deploying currently in Région Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes in France, where we are deploying 20 fueling hydrogen stations. The region and the European Union, along with the private sector, is both deploying the network, but also supporting the local transport companies to get the vehicles. So they receive, when they want to go to hydrogen, they receive a financial support. And we expect that this financial support, which is designed to bring in 1,000 hydrogen vehicles over this region, will be soon reached, so that we can fully make it a reality, making sure that this approach, supporting the demand, supporting the supply, so the network, supporting the vehicles, supporting the transport company, helping the technology developers, helping the OEMs to bring enough scale in the system to make sure that the technology become affordable. It's really an effort where we need, in fact, this collaboration. And to link it with the question of bringing in the system green hydrogen, which is, I would say, the most beneficial for our roadmap for carbon neutrality in Europe. I really think that it's linked to our capability also to accelerate in the development of renewables. We strongly believe that what we call today the blue hydrogen is a viable solution for the transition, but our green goal must be this green hydrogen. We must provide hydrogen which is very low in terms of carbon content, starting with the blue hydrogen, electricity from the grid, carbon sequestration, but we must connect it to the development in renewables and make sure that we also scale up the whole ecosystems of renewable, but also clean fuels.
Thank you very much. I hear a challenge on top of a challenge there. I'm afraid we have to stop here. The panel flew by, and it seems like we could keep talking about this for ages. I've heard a lot of words that political like, so we will need a disruptive force to actually get to where the EU wants to be in terms of climate neutrality, to give hydrogen a window to decarbonize transport. A disruptive force, a lot of cash, rethinking previously thought out frameworks in the EU, thinking out of the box a little bit in the future also when it comes to funding. So that sounds like we're going to see interesting times in the future. So I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Mechthild and Jorgo and Arthur and Overit for being here, and also thank you to the audience for being here with us today. Also thanks to our partner, the CNH Industrial and Nikola European Joint Venture, for making this event possible. Please feel free to send us your feedback at events@politico.eu. And Politico will continue hosting these types of events, so feel free to follow us in the future. Thank you very much.